In the story creation ecosystem, worlds are created by two separate, yet equally important groups. The worldbuilders, who envision the world and its intricacies, and the storytellers, who bring their world to life. This is their podcast. In 2019, a crack world-building unit was sent to prison by a critics court for an inconsistency they didn't commit. These men promptly escaped from a maximum security blog page to an underground Discord server. Today, still wanted by the critics, they survive as builders of fortune. If you have a problem, if no one else can help, and if you can find them, maybe you can hire the WB team.
So, welcome everyone to the podcast. It's starting now. And if you guys don't have any topics in mind, then the topic for today would be a nation within my world, which from a thematic point of view is supposed to be a matriarchy, and I have no clue whatsoever how I should do that and what would this entail, like, overall.
Bonobos.
I think if that is the case, since that is quite a heavy topic,
Yes.
I do have something that will probably be a good segue into that. Or at least like a good warm up. It's something I've been noticing while editing the book. I now finished the second wave of my personal edits after the editor. Basically, went over the edits, gave it a few days to settle down. I had a giant list of things that I now needed to retcon, and I went over it again yesterday and today. And it's just like I've been thinking throughout the whole thing about, like, basically, like, it does tie a bit into the storytelling aspect, but I feel like you can't really separate the two entirely unless you're literally making like the world for a scientific simulation. Because at the end of the day, like, most of these worlds that we make do end up becoming stories. And I've been noticing a few weird things about it that are not necessarily like at the point of like I need help with figuring out to do one or the other, like whether to do one or the other. Rather, I'm curious how other people do it. So there were a few things. First of all, because of the nature of the story, I tried to stay away from actually revealing on certain things what exactly happens and in general, like, a lot of smoke and mirrors in terms of making the world seem huge, but actually I only really have a town and one bar like 500 kilometers away. That's the entire world that I've world built. Sorry. But like I've been considering, just in general, the degree to which people even world build, especially for stories. Like, a lot of times when we do world building, we do it for stories that we have an idea for them, like that's supposed to be very high detail. But I feel like a part that is usually not done nearly as much is world building for stuff that you necessarily don't want the whole thing to be figured out. Because, like, if we do figure out the whole thing, then, like, for example, there's not going to be a lot of room for, like, for fan theories. Because, well, obviously we know what happens, and it's going to leak into the writing. So, like, just in general, the idea of, like, lighter world building, and basically, like, how would you, like, let's say tomorrow somebody told you, like, for NaNoWriMo, even, or how it's pronounced, that's coming up this, like, in a bit. A lot of people, like, either don't world build at all, which is a bad idea, or they world build too much and then they don't end up writing for NaNoWriMo. And then there's also the people that actually manage to do it, but, like, they're a small margin compared to a lot of people that try it. And I've been thinking,
I want to point out, though. I want to point out, though, that any book that you write in a month is going to be crap.
Yeah, at least the first draft. Like, if you write it as a first draft,
it's supposed to be only the first draft.
Yeah, it is supposed to be only the first draft, but people go into it expecting it to be an amazing finished copy. You're not going to finish a book in a month.
No.
You're going to finish the first draft.
Like, I finished mine in 4 months.
Within a month is, like, very...
It's a stretch, yeah.
Yeah.
I finished mine in 4 months, like for a bit after the first draft. and with the amount and then I had it go to an editor, and it took her half a year. And my God, the amount of retcons I had to do now that I had time to sit on it. Even if you do finish it shortly, you need this time to sit over it and let it all process. The amount of times where I had characters wrongly referencing other characters and their actions, which completely break the story, just because I was yeah, that kind of works. Or I think I had 4 different characters with the exact same premise. They were all main characters at different times and were supposed to be different, and I had to retcon all of them.
I mean, that's why we have editors, right?
Yeah, but I just been thinking, how would you go? We often talk about world building for world building all the tiny details, which is fun. But I've been wondering, how would you approach if you were told on this specific book, for example, my approach to it was don't world build too much because it's supposed to be based on dreams, and these dreams aren't supposed to be entirely sensical and coherent. How would you approach such a thing? I'm curious.
So basically, interesting fluff that doesn't go too deep but makes the world seem like it's populated.
Yeah, but you world build enough.
I think Daniel might have something to say there, because he kind of likes to do fluff, don't you?
Another tiny thing before we leave it off. Just I want to get the point across on it. It's not necessarily just fluff as much as it's basically world building. With world building, a lot of times we have these scaffoldings for we'll finish this later. World building with the scaffolding staying in on the final thing. Basically.
Daniel, you can go first, I would say.
So, for my, not story, more like an everlasting idea, I actually have something that's kind of really close to this. I want, not gonna go too much into it, but basically, for me, I have the opportunity, and that's actually part of the premise of the story, is that it's from the outside looking in, so you are observing something, a culture, a nation, a person that is built on that intentionally left out world building because it's supposed to be something enigmatic. So actually writing it down, finishing it, having an answer for everything would actually not make it enigmatic, because obviously the author found an answer, so the reader will be able to find an answer as well. Okay.
So you basically
something else pop up.
So you basically made a premise, or like an idea that you purposely didn't try to figure out then.
No, I have a situation in my story or draft, or not even draft. That's fair enough. It's half a draft, and that situation is just something very surprising, because I'm trying to write a very close to science, hard sci-fi story. So aliens is always difficult, warp drive difficult, artificial gravity that's not spin or nothing kinetic difficult. But I wanted something, right? And then so this magic, this Clark tech, whatever it is not supposed to have a fully written story, because then you are building the explanations in universe, and it's not supposed to be explainable.
So what you just described would be something that in science we describe that as hand-wavian logic. When you don't want to describe something because either A, you don't have enough time to explain it, or B, because people just wouldn't understand it in that detail.
No, in that particular case, no.
In that case,
It's
C.
like the in the in this particular case, I wanted to make sense within the story that you will not understand it. Like it's not a tool you use. It's not something you can interact with. It's something you observe and you're like, huh, I wish I would know what that was. And you're not supposed to know, and it's supposed to be written in a way that the reader understands, okay, this kind of might be frustrating, but it makes sense that we don't know this.
But I guess
Exactly.
So it's not something, yeah, you can use the warp drive or whatever and wave it, hand wave it away. What was the example with the Star Trek transporter Heisenberg's compensator? That's clearly, yeah, it just works. It just works. Don't worry about it. I don't want that. I don't want that at all. In fact,
this
I
kind of
want it
reminds
to
me
be
of Mirrond.
kind of the opposite.
Are you guys familiar with Mirrond's Long War series or world? I think Gert
Vaguely.
probably is. Yeah. In there, the process through which humanity travels through the stars also isn't like an exact science. They know how to get into this space, but how the space in there really works is pretty enigmatic to them. So it would kind of remind me of that. But I guess if no one else knows it in that detail, they...
I know why it reminds me of that. I think in a way, in a very funny way too. A lot of the more hard world building cosmic horror stuff, which is what Mirrond does a lot. A lot of it have these things where parts of the world are basically more or less just barred out, and you're told this is so different that nobody can understand it, and it can't even be put into words. In a way, it's funny because these extremely hard world building stories, of the cosmic horror and there's eldritch abominations that were stuff genre. They have a lot of parts where they intentionally either they don't tell you how it's world built and they actually know it, or they don't even try to figure it out because it's supposed to be the nonsensical part of the story.
Or if it's Lovecraft. Or if it's Lovecraft, then the characters go to a temple and say, it's non-Euclidean geometry, it's so terrifying. Even though non-Euclidean geometry is just literally geometry on a curved surface.
And everyone on
which is
the
actually
surface
really
of Earth cried.
But yeah, that was a weird thing in Lovecraft and Call of Cthulhu, because it just goes, oh, it's non-Euclidean geometry. That was a hand wave. That was a hand wave, like we're talking about.
I mean,
Yeah,
it sounds
was not
horrid and
good
weird.
Lovecraft was a very special fella.
Mm.
A very talented fella, if you ignore the problematic aspects of his life.
I mean, I
Yeah.
read some of his stories. They're not bad, but some of them are I don't know what the point of this was just now. So
Yeah, a lot of it is...
He was breaking the ice, just like Freud was another absolute crazy maniac that history remembers as a genius.
maybe.
Yeah, I think Tolkien can also be seen in that light. Where I think if you compare a lot of some modern Eldritch horror, or Lovecraftian horror, as a lot of people call it, to Lovecraft's actual writing, I don't think it would I think some of it would probably beat his, but he was the first to actually to actually popularize it.
Oh, okay, you meant
So,
in this
like,
regard. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, everybody already had something that you can see. Okay, this works. This doesn't work. So you are always in some sense building up on the stories of others.
Yeah.
So that makes sense that Tolkien, Lovecraft, that they they started it, but they might not necessarily be the best.
Calm, I think
Not
you
anymore.
wanted to say something about Lovecraft as well?
Were you talking to me? I was barely paying
Yeah.
attention for the last few minutes.
Yeah, I think you wanted to say something earlier about Lovecraft.
Oh yeah, a lot of his stories, it's very clear that he's written it just because he doesn't understand something.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
It's actually hypothesized by a lot of people that the reason his horror was so effective was because really he just took things from his life that he did not understand, like the fear of others and the fear of many other things. Like he was a very troubled man, to say the least. So he took a lot of that, and really, like his writing was just that with some makeup on it, and that's why it was so effective, because it was the raw feeling. And why still to this day, like, sure, there is some stuff that is better than his, but most of the genre today still can't compare to him. And he wrote it with no reference, and they had him for reference.
To bring it back to the initial topic, Carbon, do you want to say anything about world building that's not really world building, but
Well, I could mention something that I have written previously, something that's called the Pathwalkers series. So there's 6 Winds of Power and the Pathweb in this universe. The Winds of Power being time, space, life, death, light, darkness, but that doesn't really matter. And there are as many universes as there are possible combinations of the Winds of Power plus 1, because 1 is just being able to go into the Pathweb. But the thing with that is that I don't describe what each of those other universes are. I just stick in the universe with all 6, which is kind of a parallel to our own universe. And I say, oh, these other universes, they exist, but I don't go into detail on them because it's just not necessary for the story.
Yeah, I guess what I would want to say to Gerb's question is, I think the more the world building aspect is integrated into your story, the more necessary it becomes to flesh it out or make it so nebulous that it's clear that this isn't the focus point of the story or part of the story really. Yeah, that's for
Don't
example.
make it sound like.
Yeah, sorry, go on.
Don't make it sound like an encyclopedia.
Yeah, I guess.
Is kind of what it sounds like you're saying. Sounds like you're saying kind of, if it doesn't flow, don't put it in.
Or if you want to put it in, make sure that it flows. Yeah, basically.
It's actually what I'm struggling with at the moment. I've basically frozen. I've frozen my attempts at writing until I can figure out how to make the fluff that I want to be in to be actual relevant parts of the story.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah.
Just to give an example, I have 7 nations in my world and in my story, but I'm really only fleshing out one of them right now because that's where the first part of the story takes place, and I only have like cornerstones for the other kingdoms. For example, the one where there's supposed to be a matriarchy. I know that there's supposed to be one, but for now it's not really important how it looks like, so I guess that's also a thing you can do, that if you just want to let the reader know that there is more stuff out there, you can just point to these cornerstones which you know will be in there, and yeah.
Well, for your matriarchy, it's possible that you could kind of just have the starting point of they would have more feminine values.
Yeah. What?
Just as your starting point.
Yeah, true.
And then figure out...
You could also use real, actual matriarchies on Earth as your examples. or you just take a dynasty and just flip genders. I'm not sure how much the matriarchy matters for what you're writing. As in, like, the matriarchy is basically, like, in its original sense, it's about the mother is who rules. So it would be this, you would be going into, like, this culture and the spiritual sense where the ruler is the mother of the people. So you could base it either on the original, or maybe you want to go with something modern, but like the king is just a queen instead, which, I mean, I guess you can also do it, but that would be more of an aristocracy at that point, just with female leaders.
Yeah, here's the thing with matriarchies. All of the examples I'm aware of for our world, the matriarchies usually don't become like huge empires or something like that. And the nations in my world are all pretty vast at the end. So I'm not sure how that would work on a
You
like
also have quite
administration
different. You also have quite different rules though when it comes to your world. So that doesn't necessarily exclude that.
Not just that. Like I think a lot of things, like a lot of times, I feel like it's probably not mentioned nearly as much. But really, when we think about it, like empires in the proper sense, like sure we had like there were empires, like around like for quite a while, like before Rome and like Greece and like all the other empires around that area, but like it's kind of the thing with them where at some point they switched from being like these rather unstable local empires to, well, Rome and the Greeks before them. The switch happened at various times throughout the world, but like there was at some point, and a lot of times it depended on how can they actually sustain such an empire. There was usually a switch of like, well, they now have the technology like for that. And I think like you can see with the like, and there are a few switches like that actually, throughout the years. Because for example, you can see that like England was like ruled a lot of like the world for the colonialism age, and I think a big part of that is that they had an edge in like they had a serious edge in the medieval era because like they had the like English longbow, which absolutely decimated many battles, and so they had a lot of power there. So when this switch like technologically happened to like gunpowder and then all the other stuff after that, and then colonialism like kicked in like at full throttle, they were at a good position. So I think with a lot of it, you could have a matriarchy survive really well, and you could have like many different structures survive really well, because the ruling structure has a lot less effect than your, like I feel at least, that's my personal opinion, than for example like the technology that you had when everybody started colonializing everything. That's my short tangent on that.
You can like with Great Britain, they not only had an advantage in technology, or at least at the relevant portions of history, but they always had a very marine focus, which enabled them to be this powerful sea state that could actually drive colonialism. You can give your empire an edge that can explain away some of its power. That doesn't necessarily have to, like, it didn't, like, yes, it mattered, but you have room to wiggle. Like when the king and queen decided they want a big navy, that doesn't have to be because they were this or the other family or this or the other gender. That was just a decision that made sense. So
I guess,
maybe pick the power from somewhere else than just the ruling caste.
I guess one concern I have with using a matriarchy, or maybe matriarchy is too strong of a word, but yeah, now that I think of it, one sec. I need to think about that. Would you still call it a matriarchy if the like ruling line goes from like mother to daughter, or would you just call that monarchy with like female?
I mean, why not both?
Okay.
That can be both. That is both. It's just, in that case, you are toning down your story a bit because it's just gonna be, oh, okay, this is monarchy, just gender swap. But you can also then go back and show like cultural differences from this focus on or you can give the original note of matriarchy. The mother is the ruler, so it's very about family and about homecoming and the.
Yeah, that's.
You can use those elements to drive that monarchy. So it is a monarchy, but with like matriarchal aspects.
Okay. Now, one of the concerns I would have is how would such a society explain expansionary behavior? Because as far as I'm aware, we don't, except for maybe Queen Victoria. Back in the days, we didn't really have a whole lot of female rulers who tried to expand their empires and did so successfully.
Well, Queen
Did
Victoria,
we have that many female rulers at
Yeah,
all?
Exactly.
Queen Victoria wasn't the one expanding, really. By the time she was there, the monarchy didn't have a huge amount of power. It was more the parliament. And
But
also,
another thing... Go ahead.
and also female rulers in Great Britain have never really been treated as women. They're treated as monarch, as genderless monarch.
Okay.
Because it's one of those things where you can actually see it, even like even the Cold War. I think it's actually a very good example because the US and the USSR, they took very, very different approaches to politics, to ruling things. And while everybody likes to shit on the Soviets, and believe me, I am one of those people. Everybody likes to shit on the Soviets for like some of the weirder stuff they did. At the end of the day, they both achieved very impressive things and did very impressive feats because we just remember the Americans because the USSR collapsed. But at the end of the day, what decided how they acted, what they actually were capable of achieving, was a lot more what they just worked with, the infrastructure, the way they managed the lower things, than if you had a Stalin in power or a Reagan in power or any other president or whatever. Because the system of government will usually not be that different the lower you go into the hierarchy, which is where it actually interfaces with the populace. It will have different namings and different ways to get there, but the actual way they manage it won't be that different. So really, it's just a matter of if you roll enough dice with monarchs, you're gonna get a good monarchy. If you roll enough dice with a dictator, you're gonna get a good dictator, etc., etc., etc. It's just that different systems have slightly different odds for their dice rolls and how they last over time and stuff like this. But generally speaking, the reason we didn't have a lot of female monarchs throughout history that were well known is really just because culturally it didn't happen. Because when you actually look at them and you put it the statistics in perspective, it doesn't matter what a monarch had in their pants. It just matters whether they were a monarch.
I would say that's
because in a
probably
monarchy, when a monarch actually makes a decision, it's very it's unless it's court politics, it rarely has to do with them as a person, and as such, usually it wouldn't actually matter who the monarch is. It just matters what decision he makes to go downwards, into the populace.
One thing I would like to point out that we might be overlooking a bit for history is that religion was a big part in it, and that's I would say that's probably one of the bigger reasons why there weren't that many female monarchs, at least in Europe.
Like, at this point, it's a bit like hypothetical, but my hypothesis that like is based on a few things actually. Is that I think it goes deeper than religion. I think it goes even further back. And it's not a hypothesis I alone share, because for a long time there have been people saying that basically, if you look at it culturally, culturally, females and males have had like distinct roles in society. Some people might even say that they're baked into biology. Other people will say no. That's a discussion for another time. But when you look at it, it's basically how, you can see these patterns even when we're just tribal beings, because it wouldn't take a lot of males to basically create a new generation as long as the females were safe. But if all the females were gone, then it doesn't matter how many males you have. Like, the reproduction is just not the same. And, with that, you would see that a lot of tribal societies would, the reason the males were the warriors was basically because you keep the females safe. Yeah, because you keep the females safe, and then you have another generation. And you see this actually in animals, in many animals as well. Not in all animals. The animal kingdom is very rich. You see that in many animals. And I feel like religion, in many ways, we can look back on Judaism, for example, and we can see that a lot of the traditions in Judaism were probably things that really, if you told people to act like it, because it makes sense, they wouldn't believe you back then. But if you told them that this is the word of God, whether it is or not is relevant, because it made them survive better. It made them, hygiene was the reason they survived plagues so well, because people around them...
They did not survive plagues well.
Relatively. We're not proving that point well.
Europe died in the Black Death. They did not survive plagues well.
Oh, I'm not talking about Europe. I'm talking specifically about Judaism.
Yeah, I have heard that before. that they were actually blamed for the plague because they didn't get it as much.
Less. Because they died less, and if they died less, then they're probably spreading it. When really they just had stricter regulation and hygiene, because Judaism has that.
They must be devil spawn. They're doing better than us.
So yeah, it's one of those things where I think with religion, a lot of commandments about religion, and even you can even look at it from a philosophical standpoint, where if the religion is the word of God, and the God obviously knows what makes the people survive, then it would make it would make a lot of sense for the God to also sprinkle in some helpful stuff in there that genuinely helps them survive, and it's not just for worship. And so, with this thing, if you have a lot of things with religion where we can look back on it and see that, it took wisdom and massed it as religion, because then you can spread it to the masses, then the idea of keeping the females safe and having the males be the fighters makes sense. But a side effect of that is that if the males are fighting, the males get glory, then the males become well known and well renowned for their achievements, and then eventually they become monarchs, because, well, if this person has such a good track record, people are going to follow them on more than just a battlefield. And a lot of monarchies developed due to that. They developed due to reputation, at the very least, in the first few generations. The reputation of the monarchs that, in the public's eye at least, earned their place as just rulers.
I'm not 100% sure if I would agree with all of the reasoning or the causations, but I guess overall it would make sense. Although I would say that, in my opinion, it comes more down to the ability of males to project force and use violence. And I guess the last man standing is the one who's, well, not necessarily right, but he's the one who has won, so...
Yeah, and again, it's the whole thing, at some point with the whole, are males stronger because of their role, or are they stronger because of their role, that, so they evolved to be stronger, or will they always stronger and then assume the role? there's a whole chicken and egg discussion there. But the hypothesis itself is that, like, given this situation, it makes perfect sense for this to develop, and I wouldn't say it's necessarily religion, because, at least in my, like, humble opinion, it probably goes deeper. It probably goes before religions were this widespread and this uniform. When we still believe the spirits were down the river, just waiting to kidnap some kids.
I guess one thing I would like to ask then is, if we go with the assumption that we have the like matriarchal how's it called, secession, is that the right word? Succession.
Yeah, secession would be something very different.
Yeah,
it's like secession, but it sucks. Yeah.
Yeah, and if we have that, and this like nation becomes expansionary, how would this kind of succession continue when it was like when males would be the ones most dominant on the battlefield?
I thought you were going to say
stability.
when they're diluted by other societies that are more male for a minute there.
No, because the societies in my world like develop for a few hundreds of years before they get in touch with other societies, really. So there's some splits within the society, probably, I would assume, but it's still mostly homogeneous, I would say.
Again, could you repeat the question, because I don't fully understand like the question itself.
How stable would a monarchy with a matriarchal line of succession be if they start expanding and the males in there find out, whoa, we can do stuff?
I think it could still be stable. The reason for that being because in an expansion, everyone contributes, both men and women. Men contribute fighting and force, but women tend to contribute food and other resources. And so maybe they value resources more than they value physical strength. And so if they value the resources more, then they're going, oh, these people, the women are providing resources for the expansion, and so they are responsible for the expansion, not the people who just happen to have done the punching using the resources.
Okay.
Not just that.
You can also say that they would value leadership, and if in the matriarchal society that leaders, if all they value is the leadership of the women, then it would work anyways, even without the force or the resources.
Another thing I would argue is, like, basically, let me answer your question with a question, an rhetorical one, but still. If the people doing the fighting would think, wait, we can do this, why aren't we ruling? Then you would have you would have a similar situation in Europe, because most kings and monarchs would not ride into a fight. Some of them did, and they are very respected for that. But many of them did not ride into a fight because many of them were politicians. It's the idea that, yeah, they will feel we can fight, but that disconnect between we can fight and we can also rule was a very strong one in these societies, because a monarchy kind of requires you not to think I can do this better. It requires you to think the monarch was born into this, they are the most well versed in this and the most prepared for this. And so, it's just the idea that really the people on the front line, they might feel we can lead each other into battle, or we can fight well, and they will earn respect, undoubtedly so. But they wouldn't think I can run a country.
Because, that is true. That is true.
A lot of people wouldn't just think, I can beat somebody in a wrestling match. I can run a country. Especially that.
Yeah, that
Right,
is
and you can have it so that the system is that if you have a queen, she's the one that's running the country, and then her husband, the king, would be the one that's running the military. You can have something like that.
Okay. I guess what I was thinking about as well is how strong would be the drive to, like, go out into different lands or, like, explore the world when there's this matriarchal structure. But I guess this would still happen, right?
Well, it might happen for the sake of either academia or necessity instead of we just want more land, because maybe they don't have enough resources to support a growing population, so they go, let's conquer some land. Or they're going, hey, we want to learn some things, let's conquer some land.
Okay, so the drive would
Yeah.
probably be a different one compared to a more patriarchal structure then.
Not necessarily even, I would
Not
argue.
necessarily, no.
Because, like, this whole thing, like, if it was an altist that, like, separated around, like, 3,000, 4,000 years ago or something, that would be one thing. But we're talking about a world that is built from scratch into this. And it's one of those things where I would argue that the fact that we in our world today have, like, these gender roles, they make sense from what we evolved through, to a degree. Evolution is never perfect. But, like, really, that's the beauty of world building, where you can rig things slightly differently, and then have the female role be a lot more violent. Maybe not necessarily in the field, but still violent and conquering. And the male's actually thinking, like, the male's basically being a bunch of posh, posh Victorian age, Victorian era Brit gentlemen. They're like, I have a rifle and a magnifying glass. Look at this plant I found.
Now let me shoot the plant.
Not really
Yes.
what I was going for, but I get what you mean. Okay.
Yeah.
So, as far as values of this society would be concerned, I've written down that it's probably gonna be pretty family-centric, and that's it so far.
It doesn't have to be. That is just if you want to go OG, like the dictionary definition that nobody uses, sense of matriarchy.
I mean, would be
You
good.
could also just have you could just go the classic monarchy route, where women are just clearly in this universe more trusted, and they are more. You can create that story as well.
Everyone seems to be looking for the word assertive in this conversation, and no one seems to be able to find it.
Oh, yeah.
Well, you just did.
Now that you said it. True.
Just remember, guys, that the family is a patriarchal structure, so
I
keep
would
that in mind.
disagree with that, but okay.
Modern feminism would not agree with you. So.
And I would not agree with modern feminism on many things. So
Modern
here we are.
feminism can go screech somewhere.
Everybody can go speak somewhere. The whole world
like,
can
I mean,
do it.
we're
just
gonna try
to go on a
someone to not go screech
tangent,
somewhere,
just
right?
to go on a tangent, we're talking about, when you mean modern feminism, we're talking about the insane Twitter warriors that are
Third wave and onward,
basically
yes.
female supremacists. That's
Yeah,
the
third
one.
wave and onwards. First
Yeah.
wave was somewhat sensical, actually very sensical in many cases. Second wave, depends who you ask. Third
I
wave,
mean, second wave
I believe.
second wave was still good, just the continuation, getting stuff done, keep stuff rolling.
Yeah.
Now it just doesn't really it doesn't really make sense at this point to, like, I mean, they are ruining the word feminists themselves. So
yeah, it's why a lot of previously self-identified feminists are now calling themselves differently, because it's just the same thing. It's like, at some point, it just once the movement swings into full action, it's very hard to keep it rolling in the right way. And at some point, if you can't steer the wheel, you just jump out.
I mean, you
and
either
make
die
it-
a hero.
Make a new call.
either die a hero or
Yeah.
you die as a villain. So
Or you just leave
Anyways.
the whole damn thing and start over.
Back on topic, I guess.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, I don't think there's a whole... Oh, okay. I guess one value for the society would be that it's more exploratory in the sense that it's in the sense of curiousness.
Again, like, I think this is like the whole thing. Like this would explain a lot of the back and forth we have here. Yes, speech. It's just I think
words?
what I was anyway. Yeah. So like, it's just the idea that like, I don't think the rolling structure will have that much of an effect if you're talking from a purely world building perspective. Especially because it's one of the easiest things to retcon, because like you don't need a lot of changes to change how tribal societies acted with warriors, for example. You just made, for example, the fatality rate lower from like fighting between tribes, and suddenly you would have a lot more female warriors because there wouldn't be the concern of everybody just got slaughtered. How do we secure the next generation? And so I don't think there's a lot of effect for a purely custom world. There's not going to be a lot of effect for like, is the role of female or male on how the culture like down the line actually works. As much as it would be affected by different things, like what did they have near them, which is easily controlled, and just in general, like the role you want them to fit in the story, and the role compared to like the contrast from the other nations. I think that like if we go by like our world's rule set, like quote unquote, it would just say like, let's say around like 100 BCE or something like that, an island popped up with some people, and they had a slightly different setup that resulted in a matriarchy. And like, how would they act with the rest of Europe? That would be one thing. But if this island is now a huge custom world that has no interaction with ours, I would argue it would be a lot different. And I think you can also see that because there were some cultures, especially in the East, that had very different rules for how the rulers acted and everything. And they went in very different ways. The only reason they now are closer to what the rest of the Western or modern, or however you want to call it, all these definitions are a bit flawed. The only reason they're closer to this is because the world became globalized slowly,
And England
so
conquered everything.
yeah, that too. That's part of globalization in just a very different way. Everything. If everything is England, then everything is connected. But because of that, they're a lot more like synced up with us. But it's one of the reasons I find Asian history so fascinating. It feels like a different world because they didn't have a lot of interactions. They had some trade, but really, there weren't a lot of traders going the full way. So they had a lot less interactions.
All right. I think I'm done with my topic so far, or with this topic at the very least. It was pretty insightful. Any other topics you want to talk about?
I would have one last comment on that one, just with
Yep.
the matriarch thing. The way children are treated, I think, would change. I think that children would be more likely to be given to be mandated to be given an education, just because generally mothers tend to want all their children to do well more so than fathers do.
Yeah, as long as you keep like the reproduction itself the same, then you will have these drives. These are drives that just like they're very hard to pull apart from the biology of this. It's like probably one of the hardest parts to actually disconnect from this whole thing, because it's just so much more sunk cost into the child. That's that would probably be one of the only effects you can't change too much.
Just based on that, I think universal education and universal healthcare would be much more common in that sense, that would be much more likely in that society.
So I guess more social policies in general would have a stronger emphasis.
That sounds good, actually.
A stronger emphasis on the
agree with
group
that.
rather than the individual, yeah.
And on health in general. You like, again, the thing I said earlier too, like, if the death rates from battles go down by even 10%, the change this actually means for the whole thing is massive. It's absolutely massive, because just 10% is probably enough for many tribes to start considering female warriors more seriously, because it's so much less likely for them to die out. And like, it's not necessarily that it's more likely for them to consider it, because many tribes throughout history did consider it. It's that these tribes that considered it are more likely to survive and continue the tradition.
Here's the thing with this particular nation in my story, or for most nations anyway. They don't really interact with other tribes that much. There are some like wild threats to them, and like, well, they're not really animals, but let's call them that. So I guess in this way, the like martial aspects of society, and which usually would fall to the male parts of society, would also not be as pronounced. So I guess that also means that this kind of matriarchy would be more likely, or more, what would you call it? More probable.
I have no argument against that.
Well, okay. I guess that's that topic.
Wait,
then.
no argument against what? I spaced out for a moment. Why are we not arguing? What are we not arguing about?
I have no argument against if there's less communication with external forces and the male role is more of a protector than a fighter and an enforcer, or a conqueror, then it would be more likely that a matriarchy could occur.
Yeah. And by the way, that can still be, like, you can still have a protector being a conqueror. It's just that the reason for conqueror will be for security instead of, a plant.
Hey, we need the Crimea to protect our interests, so just take it.
Yeah, this oil will be very good for national security.
Okay, so any more world building questions you guys have?
You mean the militia of forward defense?
The militia of forward defense. I like that one. There's one world building question I think I have. No, actually two. But two very different topics, worlds, I guess I would say. One of which is about a world I actually have a chance to work on over the next few years. The other one is about the one I don't. One of them is a lot more heavier on fantasy world building. The other one is a lot more focused on basically the changes that would have to occur in our world for some very fantastical elements to fit in. Not sure which one to pick. So yeah, they both matter equally. So I'll let you pick. And then yeah.
I mean, I don't feel strongly either way when it comes to that. So.
In that case, I feel like we'll go with Sleeping World. So, a bit of background before we begin. Sleeping World is kind of my childhood dream project. So it's I didn't actually think of it since I was a child. It's just, it encapsulates everything I ever wanted to do in world building, and it's kind of my magnum opus. And as such, I'm not going to have time to work on it in the next few years, probably. But it has some very weird concepts I've been messing with. And that is basically that, unlike in many worlds, I don't have a lot of role, like a big role in terms of how the actual societies and world is built, because they are designed in world. The idea is basically that the current society is the fourth iteration, if I remember correctly, where the first society was a very successful one, very successful empire, and then they had a huge fuck up, a gigantic fuck up that caused them to be wiped, but they had enough of a warning that they're about to be wiped in order to basically seed like a new civilization. And then that process repeated. This new civilization did not manage to fix the fuck up, getting wiped again, but they had clues that they're about to be wiped, so again they designed a new civilization that they thought, if we take what we have currently, we can probably design something even better. And then another cycle, and we have reached the current age, where they're very close to the next wipe, and they're actual idiots, so they do not have a clue about it yet. And it's just a thing where, like, usually when we build, like, a world out of nothing, we have a lot of control about religion. We have a lot of control about the gods that have a play in the, like, about the way the world actually interacts with things, the way that things happen there. There's a certain level of consistency that we can hold ourselves to. But all that kind of goes out the window when your own societies have to start building their own societies. And so it leaves me with many very, very weird questions about the whole thing. Because at the end of the day, they can't afford another reset. Like, if they don't succeed this time, they're wiped for good. And, like, I have some things in place, like an artificial god built by the previous empires that is slowly being improved upon in order to guide them through the whole reset where a lot of data is lost. And a lot of very cheeky, like, tricks to avoid this reset. But, like, it's just the idea of, like, how would you even go about doing that? How would you even go about building a society out of nothing? And that this society, you can't just gamble on them eventually succeeding. You have to make sure that they succeed. You have to set them up in a way where, at least, like, basically, like, the idea, like, the similar thing would be if in our world, we now knew that there was an impending doom and that we have to design a society from scratch that will be able to survive whatever calamity is going when it comes back again. How do you even go about doing that?
You mean climate change? Because we have that.
I do not mean it as an allergy to climate change, because mainly because the calamity was entirely brought upon themselves. They tried to open portals to, like, they realized that there are more worlds out
So still climate change, huh?
Yeah,
Well,
still sounds like climate
there are
change.
more worlds around, and they tried to open a portal, but they didn't actually know what these worlds are, and they opened a portal to a very nice world, which is basically the equivalent of many abyss or void or whatever you want to call them from many stories of, like, the all-knowing hunger, knowing as in, like, mighty.
Well,
And-
I've got several questions there then. For one, how did they close it? Or if they didn't, why is the world
didn't.
not kaput right now?
So they didn't, and what this caused is that eventually the void incursion calmed down significantly because they didn't have enough forces to actually eat the whole thing, and so eventually the portal on their side closed. So now they are working on opening it again, and that's why there are cycles. Basically, every time they manage to open it, and then they send stuff through to eat everything, and then less land survives the whole thing. So there's less land on the actual world, and, like, everything that lived dies. And they also work excruciatingly, like, to erase every detail about them. So most of the details about this from previous empires are heavily encrypted through the most bizarre methods they can think of, with a lot of redundancy just to make sure that enough knowledge actually reaches the next generation. With the idea that if it just sounds like gibberish, they won't think that it matters enough to delete it. So, like, basically they only have enough land left for this generation because the next one will not even have enough land to build up properly to manage to actually close the portal for good.
So, Mass Effect.
I have not played
It's
that.
definitely. I mean, that doesn't just because it's been done somewhat similar doesn't mean that the story won't be unique. So,
I have no clue how Mass Effect goes. I can assure you that from little bits I do know, it's going to be very different in how it
every
plays out.
50,000 years, AI aliens come and cull all the intelligent biologicals because they are a danger to themselves. Just the ultimate "I will kill you so you can't kill yourself" logic.
Interesting.
Wasn't there like a further explanation in one of the DLCs where
Yeah,
was
they
like,
tried to retcon it,
Yeah,
but
they
they broke my heart with the original release of Mass Effect 3, and since then I have never been able to really engage in a story-driven RPG anymore. It was too much. Oh, the stake, the world is at stake. Like the
All your
universe
actions
is at
matter.
stake. Existence is at stake. The multiverse is at
No,
shut the
that's
fuck
not.
up.
Yeah.
just
No, it wasn't
just
the
too
multiverse.
much.
Can we
Just-
have
Sounds
just
sort of-
one person who is emotionally significant being at stake for once?
Yes, please. Yeah, Yeah, like I'm so freaking fed up with stories that only advance the plot by now the entire planet is about to explode.
Yeah. So I actually do have something lined up for that, and that is that like basically there is a reason for the previous empires to actually try to fix this, not just look at our children going. It's also because when the Void Things eat something, they don't die. They do not die. So it's basically a thing of if we can make them beat this, we will be released from the eternal suffering that is soon going to catch us. So, like, there's actually, like, the stakes are not, the world is going to be ruined. The stakes are, we need these idiots to succeed because if they don't succeed, we're staying here.
Eternal suffering! Yay!
Yay! Yeah. So that's that. Like, I try to avoid the whole like the universe is ending. You're the only person that can save it,
I guess
including the fact that the
the
whole
question
thing.
to me would be
The risk is. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, the question to me would be how sentient these creatures are. Because if they're like just, in quotation marks, dumb animals eating everything in their sight until the portal collapses, then I don't think it would be really hard to leave good clues for whoever comes next.
Yeah, no, the void creatures are very sentient, and they also like. If they figure out something from what they eat, then they know it. So, like, they know that that these guys are trying to create like new people, new people that will beat them. They know that.
That just raises the question to me how they succeeded the first time to let the next generation know that there's something coming.
The first time, not a lot of information passed, but what did pass, they just said, like, they had some time, like, the first reset wasn't, like, full on, so they had some time to see that these creatures learned, and as a result, a lot of what they did was erased from their own memories as soon as they did it. Including, like, on the third iteration, they went as far as to create, their own language, that can only be deciphered by very certain individuals from birth. And as soon as they decipher it, they understand it fluently and perfectly. But to everyone else, it looks like beyond just jargon. And then on top of that, they decided, now let's make a ton of redundant messages on this.
Okay. Then I guess the question
It's
would
like-
be how
it's
they
awful.
fucked it up for the fourth cycle.
What?
I mean, you're in the 4th iteration then in the story.
Yeah.
Or, yeah. How did this knowledge not pass on to them then if they already succeeded 3 times, or at least 2 times?
Because the idea with what they did with the 4th iteration is they created what the reason for the title, Sleeping World. They created these people called sleepers. And these sleepers, basically, they are very high-powered humans that, as a result, have to go into stasis every so often to recharge. And these people are capable of reading the language, at least some of them. Kinda. It's a bit more complicated. Basically, they don't particularly read the language themselves as much as when they go into stasis, the language is projected from them. And certain other individuals are capable of actually reading the language. The problem is that we added one extra layer of security to it that was basically meant to be the idea was that sleepers amplify each other and the projection thing, with the idea being once they civilize enough and they live in big cities, eventually the sleepers are gonna group up when they're in stasis, because they also sync their stasis up a bit with each other. And once they group up when they're in stasis, they're gonna notice that there's a clue there. That was the idea. Problem is, they didn't go into urban living until 200 years before the reset. Because too much land was eaten up, so it didn't work that well to go into urbanization. And that was the fuck up. That was the one tiny fuck up. But yeah, so because of that, they're now catching up at record speed, because this method of conveying the information is really efficient. They also stored it in so the reason they knew there were more worlds is because one of the worlds is actually very closely linked to theirs, and they stored some of the information there just to make sure that there's a backup, and they did all that. But now the humans are basically catching up at record speeds, but they're still taking their sweet ass time because there's a lot of knowledge to catch up on. Closing the portal is not a simple thing. So yeah, that is that.
Wait, you mean closing the portal for good then? Not just because you said it closes eventually anyway, so...
No, on the side of the void, they don't actually have what it takes to keep it running for so long. So then they slowly charge it. But the thing is, they made sure that it will be a lot harder to close it. So, including the hypothesis that some people have, that in order to close it, they literally have to go to the void's own dimension and close it from their side. They're still not certain about it. Okay, it's another word for I'm not certain how I'm gonna do the finale. Yeah.
I would say how I would go about it is that, and I think you already told some of this to us, that from each iteration there is some more restrictions going down to the next one. And you kind of have to extrapolate from there, I would say.
Yeah. There definitely it definitely does become harder throughout the generations. Another thing is that because of the whole spirit realm that is fairly close to their world, these spirits also have a say in this, and they also get every time they intervene in these fights, it ends very badly for them. And so they already took a lot more casualties from the last ones because they didn't just regenerate the entire thing. So from their perspective, they have to bet either on this generation or the next one, and the odds of this one aren't looking good, and they need the help of the spirits if they actually want to have a chance at beating it, because the spirits have some of the missing parts as well as the extra firepower that they have to use.
Quick question. Is this all playing on, Earth, just a different Earth from ours, or is this,
No, it's completely unique.
Completely unique, okay.
Including the fact that I had a whole thing for the geometry of the entire thing. They're basically living on a flat circle with a dome above it that looks like the sky, and when you can, if you go down, you can actually fall to another dimension, and they aren't aware of that yet. But basically, what the void does is they eat down enough so that if you fall to their dimension. They can't go up through these holes, but it means that there are many parts of the world where if you fall down, you will never be found.
Okay. So the like astronomy is also something completely different than.
Yeah.
Okay.
The entire concept of space is a bit warped.
Yeah, okay, because I was just thinking, okay, if this is like this portal is on their planet, why don't they just go to another planet? They sound sufficiently advanced to do that. But if there are no other planets, I guess that's like.
You can only fall through to another planet on the rotation, like to have another dimension, rather, on the rotation. So you have to go in a cycle, and the next one of the cycle is the void one. So they can't do that, and they can't really cross into the spirit realm either. Like they have some interaction with them, but not enough to cross people through. Spirits can move through, not the humans. Yeah, there's a lot of world building going into that thing. It's my magnum opus.
And any more specific questions about it then, or because I think you said you had another question as well. Then.
So about this particular one, I do have more questions, and one of them is basically like, it's a very weird one, but in this world, one of the things that the previous civilizations actually created, in order to make sure that these humans actually don't kill each other all the time because they need to develop fast, is they also created another very difficult obstacle, and it's basically like. It's these giant energy monsters going around terrorizing things, like absolutely terrorizing things, so that they have enough of a common enemy that they don't end up fighting each other too much. And the problem with that is that I know how to work with the smaller ones. The smaller monsters, I actually ran like a campaign in Sleeping World, and they were fighting the smaller ones, the players though. But basically it's this idea of like, there are some truly gigantic, terrifying monsters in there. And I'm trying to figure out how to make them... like, what to even keep in mind when designing them. Because, well, if they're too strong, they're going to wipe everything out. But if they're too weak, then they're not going to be enough of a threat. But also there's another thing, which is, how do you even fight something this strong? Because, like, you can't just throw... like, at some point, you can't throw more people at it. It just doesn't work. They die before they even get close.
That sounds a bit too strong then, I would say.
Yeah. So that's too strong, but then at the same time, if they don't have this, then you can just throw more people at them. Clearly there needs to be something more delicate about some of them, about how you defeat them, or at the very least keep them away. And I'm kind of stumped for ideas for it. Because, yeah, it's a lot more difficult.
I don't think it's a problem that you could theoretically just throw more people at it, as long as there's the like logistical problem behind. Well, we could theoretically put like 5 billion guns at it, but we only have space for so many, and we only have food for supplying this many, so you can put some restrictions on it this way.
But like another problem with it too is the fact that like these monsters by design, like the thing that makes them so terrifying for the people and why they even need to be scared of them, is that these monsters drain the energy around them. Basically, they're not like in this world. Like magic, I went for a very simple solution to it that does make things a lot harder on me later, but it makes things consistent. Which is, magic is really just, you have this energy that is abundant everywhere, and it is endless. It gets created at a certain rate in certain areas. And these monsters are made of this energy, and since humans also have this energy, and it's what's keeping these humans from falling apart, anything that isn't protected by energy falls apart very quickly though. So these monsters eat energy. That's the entire thing. So if you throw too many people at it, it's just going to eat them and strengthen itself. So, we lost Cabo.
Rip.
Random interruption whenever you happen to see it. I'm disappearing now because it's late and I have things to do tomorrow. Rip. We have another person recording, right?
I am the one recording, so
okay,
no worries.
Because sometimes he does, yeah. So, like, basically it's the idea of these monsters already feed up on the energy. So you can't just throw too many people at them without thinking. So then the question becomes, then how do you defeat them? And like again, the smaller ones, with a competent enough party of adventurers, they're not going to be able to to pick off any certain one because they're not strong enough if the party acts correctly. But that principle doesn't scale well because at some point, they're still humans. I'm not going into territories of this is a superhuman that can't die to anything. Sure, he's strong. He has a lot of energy, and he's still a human. So, at some point, it doesn't scale well. But at the same time, a monster is not terrifying if one person or one party of adventurers can kill it.
I mean, you just can, spawn hundreds of thousands of them. You can
There's a lot of the small ones, but, there are some large ones that are truly strong.
Daniel?
I mean, if they have energy zapping abilities, you can just make it omnidirectional. It doesn't matter how many people or how many guns you throw at it, they'll just zap it. The closer you get, the more they extract.
So basically what you want to
can
do is
throw
keep the distance then.
every single atom in the universe at them and they will just absorb all of the energy and probably cause the next Big Bang.
Yeah. So it's one of those things where I've been thinking, because again, there's not going to be a ton of these monsters, but they have a very good purpose. Their purpose is they're not just there to keep the humans evolving and advancing, they're also there to train them, because these monsters, the fact that they absorb energy is really not that different from the void creatures. They are very much designed to be a training, and some of the void creatures are terrifying enough that they need, that these giant monster counterparts make sense. I'm just trying to figure out how you would kill them. How you would go about killing something that can drain energy so effectively.
I have a maybe easier analogy. Kai, Colin, whatever. How many soldiers do you need to stop a nuclear explosion?
I was thinking you're gonna ask how many soldiers does it cost for half a mile or something, because people have been referencing.
I mean, that's also a good reference, but
Sings in Sabaton.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, they got some good songs. But yeah, basically that. There are ways to make quantity isn't gonna fix this. There are ways to make that that.
I'm just trying to figure, because basically they're made to be in such a way where not only do they require so much quantity to fix, but also you can't physically throw this quantity out of them at a fast enough rate for it to work. So clearly there has to be a smarter solution to it. Again, some of the top fighters in that world, because of how strong humans can become with the energy thing, where basically it's like a muscle, but it never actually caps out. So because of how strong some of the humans can be, though, some of them can potentially even get close enough to scratch it. But you can't throw a lot of them at it, because then, if you throw too many of them, well, it's going to drain all their energy, and then they just counteract each other. But also, one of them is not going to be enough to defeat it, and neither is two, etc. So, I'm trying to think how to go about doing such a thing. How to go about even defeating such a creature. Because again, there's a very good reason that these creatures exist, even the large ones. That there's only 4 or 5 of them, but they're terrifying. But while there's a reason for them existing, there's not a lot to do in the way of fighting or even deterring them, which is a problem.
Yeah, I mean, if you don't need a lot of them if they're just that powerful.
Yeah, there's one of them, for example, there's an island where there's 1 or 2 of them, I haven't decided yet, and as a result the whole island is uninhabitable because people are too terrified of that creature. But once they can kill this creature, well, we're gonna find some very interesting and useful stuff in that island. Not to mention that, like, the energy released from that can be used for a lot of very good things. These things, at the end of the day, they do have energy, and the same way that they can drain the energy, well, you can drain their energy as well if you manage. If you do that,
I keep going back to my nuke reference. Like, how many nukes do you need to make a nation really scared of you? Like, one is enough, realistically.
No,
Yeah.
it's 2.
No, it's 1. The other one was just to see what it does. Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah, like, obviously nukes are a good reference to it, because these things are about as devastating as a few nukes, if left unchecked.
Yeah.
Um,
I've actually to just go on a tangent again. I've actually thought, like, my story. I don't have a good name for. At the moment, it's mostly a dream. I have written some. I'm probably not gonna keep any of it because I'm not that happy when going over it. But the universe, like everything, I remember it all. I have written down some. I know where I want to go with it. I don't know how to call that step in the story. I am still building the world, I suppose. But anyways, I have thought about, like, it's a sci-fi story, so, like, weapons, technology. I have thought about the yields of weapons, and mostly come down to the notion that you don't need anything bigger than existing nukes in 200 years. You don't need anything bigger. Because if you keep it hard science, or as close as possible, you don't have any magic energy shields. I have something kind of in that direction, but they have huge drawbacks. So, and they don't protect from nukes either. You don't need anything bigger than an existing tactical nuke to do whatever you want to do with that.
but then basically, like, the idea is, like, if we keep with that analogy, it's basically, how do you design a nuke that, until the society is developed enough, they feel that it is a nuke that will absolutely destroy them and that they should be very scared of it. But as soon as they get far enough, they look back to it after, like, somehow keeping it away earlier, and they look back at this nuke and they say, how about we actually take it on? And it's like, it's not necessarily that I have to design such a thing perfectly, as much as, because, again, like, with this whole thing, I try to make it so that it's not me designing some things and retconning them into the universe. It's the universe has a very specific rule set, and there are very smart people inside of it trying to abuse this rule set in order to beat a challenge. And they also built these monsters. So if there is a possibility of making these monsters act this way, they will find it. I'm just trying to think of, how do I create enough of a possibility for it to make sense that they found something.
Yeah, for them to decide, all right, let's attack now. Let's go into the... Okay. Yeah, I can...
For the current civilization to basically say, we can drain this monster and create super soldiers, the likes of which the world has never seen, and they will be able to beat the Void.
I can... Yeah, that is a good point. So, since I do take some creative freedom in my technology, in my story, but even then I'm like, should I have anything against, like, nukes? Like, the primary thing I can think of is disable the delivery method before the nuke gets close to you. But would it make sense that in 200 years there is something that can just stop a nuke or just shrug it off?
I mean, that's an interesting topic, like an interesting point about the delivery mechanism. Because if we go with this analogy, then it might not be such a bad idea. Basically,
can you just lift the plate that their civilization is on and put it somewhere else?
Yeah, like, basically, like, if we go with the monsters and the analogy of this, then potentially it might be possible to try and stop their energy drain. So that might probably lower the danger, but even then, there's a certain risk to it because, like, okay, so you lowered the danger, but then it's not going to be good practice for the void because you can't do the same on the void creatures. But what if, for example, you can do something like, because, for example, a nuke has a limited range, right? At the end of the day, like, when it explodes in a certain area.
Yeah, well, I mean, in space, it's omnidirectional, but at some point the energy is going to dissipate so much that it is just going to be similar to a slightly bigger dose of radiation. And that's actually going to be... like in terms of space distance, that's not actually going to be all that far. Like a nuke to be effective is either going to have to be some kind of smoke screen or going to be relatively or really close to whatever you're shooting at it if it's staying in a vacuum. The reason why nukes are so horribly powerful is because we have all this goddamn air around us. But they have... The range is limited for sure, and
because if the range is limited, and the nuke, like, we can take radiation as an analogy for that, where it's a continuous risk once it blows up, then supposedly, if you had a way to completely destroy the radiation by getting to the ground zero site and doing something at that, then really all you would need is something to keep you safe from the radiation and just go through the radius.
I just remembered something. Nukes are not the most powerful weapons in my story. And second, there are already theoretical ways to shield yourself against radiation, and that is what a nuke as the primary weapon, not as a power delivery method for something else, that's a different topic, but as the primary weapon, a nuke in space is not that effective. You just need really good radiation shielding. But you are already in space. You probably want really good radiation shielding. Now go 150 years into the future, you have fusion reactors, you're pumping out electromagnetic shielding. Yeah, you can protect yourself from that. If it goes hits directly, like in between magnetic fields where you're not properly protected, that's a different matter. But I actually nukes are like more like tactical torpedoes, I suppose. There are antimatter warheads, but they're just basically souped up nukes. Like they have more or less the same thing that they do when they detonate in space. It's just stronger and more space efficient, but more costly.
So, like, I've been saying, like, with this thing, like, with going with this analogy again, because it's surprisingly effective. Well, basically, like, these giant creatures, like, usually they'll, like, there's a few on the mainland, which I'm gonna have to figure out how do they keep them away. Probably some rituals or something where they basically just bait them with energy or something. I know there's one hiding in a mountain. I had a whole story about that, where basically there's a dissipating valley where it just continues to, like, whenever something steps into it, it just eats it. But, like, I'm basically thinking, since they are mostly separated from the actual, like, they're mostly distant forms of civilization, and they try to keep them away at all costs, then basically they can fight them, like, it's basically the equivalent of having a nuke constantly going off, but this nuke is like in a certain like relatively safe area, so you can go there and you can try to turn it off somehow with proper shielding from the radiation, or in this case drain. But then the final fight, it happens in a fairly isolated place because the void ate most of the area around the portal to make it exceedingly hard to find for the next civilizations.
Yeah.
I'm not basically sure. If it blows up in Vel, supposedly blow up again, the whole analogy for it, then basically it doesn't risk major civilization centers. So they can basically just try to fight it by shielding themselves enough from the drain to be able to take it on without the damage being fixed.
I mean, since this analogy has already proven to be somewhat useful, the way my energy shielding works, that is in quotation marks, is that basically it's a combination of magnetically bottled plasma field and just electromagnetic shielding in general. So it's a plasma shield is actually the most fitting name. It has drawbacks. It consumes extreme amounts of power. It cooks the user. So either you only can run it for a short time until you're about to melt your own people, or you can only have it on in one direction, so you're still exposed on the other side.
Or you run it until they're well done.
Yeah, but one feature this plasma shield has is because of the interacting energies, is that whatever projectile or energy-based weapons, I think the most effective weapon in my story was actually a specifically hardened railgun dart that is accelerated fast enough that it is not immediately shredded by the plasma field. But the energy is absorbed by the plasma shield. So if you don't have a weapon that's strong enough to punch through the plasma, it actually increases the strength temporarily by adding more matter to the shield. So I don't know if this is useful to you, but maybe if you just if the people in your universe find a way to flip the effect around, turn it around, actually use the zapping effects as a weapon, maybe have dirty energy. I don't know. That's also one way to interact. And then you already mentioned this. There are even spookier things in the dimension, right? In the void.
Yeah, the void dimension has some very concerning things.
Yeah, because I do actually have. Well, I gave it some kind of acronym. I don't remember it anymore. As it was an antimatter detonation pump fed gamma ray laser. There we go.
I was just about to ask, what about lasers, though?
It's a gamma ray laser. It's just emitted energy, but in the gamma wavelength, and it's antimatter bomb fed. So it's like actually quite a few sci-fi stories have this, where they use a nuke and they channel the radiation energy of this nuke to create a very short, extremely powerful burst of laser. And I just step this up and make it repeatable. So they just aim their lens. It's like 200 meters big. The entire ship is 5 kilometers long, I think. And detonate like a milligram, I think about a gram. No, actually about a gram. They detonate about a gram of antimatter inside the magnetic bottle inside the ship and channel that energy through that lens and just blast whatever is on the other side of the solar system.
I was just thinking, nukes? That doesn't sound like it's handheld.
No, it's it's more or less if we would build a shield from Avengers, a shield super carrier, and then mount like a death ray on it. There is only one, and I have no idea where I'm putting this in my story. It's just because I really love thinking about technology, ships, how people interact inside those ships. I'm actually struggling a little bit with the overarching story. Like the ship is basically, I mean, I have partial cut models for it. It's like I really love doing that. So I end up with lots of ship and weapon and technology designs that don't currently really have a place in the story.
You should probably take part in one of our short story sessions then, rather than the world building one here. If you're,
I think why not both?
Yeah, why not both?
I think you would get along really well with Gun Squad.
Sorry,
I
what?
really think.
I think he mentioned someone from Mirrond's server, right?
Yeah, like Gun Scott, he's also on here actually. He's away for a while, but like I think you'll get along with him. He also does a lot of very, very fun military stuff and goes into excruciating detail about it.
Wait, is he a
Um,
carbon copy or
It's
is he carbon copy on this this server or is it someone else?
Oh, he's just called Take a username.
Oh,
Take
okay.
a username or whatever.
Okay.
it's not only weapons, it's just technology in general. Like
Yeah.
the actual, I have like different like plot lines in mind I can think of, and one of which is just telling the story of the inhabitants of a generation ship heading to Barnard Star to colonize it. Like something with barely any classical antagonism going on. Like, I don't know if I want to have any spies. I don't know if I want to have any aliens. Like maybe. So I noticed that is a bit of a too much of a channel for a challenge for a rookie writer. So I'm thinking about how to use a couple more classical elements to actually get something finished. But it's definitely something I want to return to. Like, build the ship, build the people, and then figure out what story can you tell in 1.5 kilometer long ship with 9,000 people. So it's really relatively empty, but that's because it has like, it needs to build a colony when it arrives. So gotta have lots of space.
I guess you could
yeah.
work with some flashbacks in the story.
Yeah.
Yeah, but they will grow kind of weird after the 15th year.
Yeah.
Because that's how long the journey will... No, 20 years. 20 years.
Oh, Gerb?
Barnard Star is 14.5 light years, I think, away.
One more thing about the whole monsters and how to power scale them. I wouldn't be too concerned with power scaling and are they strong enough, are they too weak, whatever. Because if you get proper technology, they will probably end up being too weak, like in quotation marks, too weak. To give an example, like fortresses in the 18th century would be like a hell of a problem for an army. If you compare the usefulness of a fortress to like modern day stealth bombers, they would probably flatten this thing into or bomb it back to the Stone Age.
Because the power scaling though is rather different, and that basically like you don't really have like technology is nice to have, but it really ends up as a nice to have and as a thing for quality of life. Really, most of the things are based on magic, and the scaling of magic there is really just you can train your magic slowly but surely, and then just get more and more energy in it, or you can absorb other things for the magic, which is fairly like a lot quicker. Which is why, by the way, a lot of adventurers are hunting these monsters because they can absorb the magic and then just become stronger, while also fulfilling some jobs. And by becoming strong enough, you can just live your life fairly easily.
That sounds quite similar, or somewhat similar to another magic concept that a certain person is working on.
Sorry, who are you talking about?
That's why I said somewhat similar. I'm talking about you.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah.
It's not similar, but it's like in the sense that magic is a less of the spiritual thing and more of something that is.
It's there.
Yeah, it's there and it's used because because there's not an abundance of stories doing that.
Yeah.
So it's a fairly nice concept to take and roll with it, like to an extreme extent.
Oh yeah, I can definitely see the motivation and basically just changing the physics a little. Like,
Yeah.
making the physics a bit more interesting for your story. I can definitely see that as well. Like I set myself the challenge. I want to have some crazy technology, like a planetary scale gamma ray laser. Certainly doesn't sound like real hard science, but like basically, if there is a working theory now, it can be done in 150 years. Is what like I kind of use as a excuse. Yeah.
It's actually like with this magic, I even went as far as saying like we have this energy, and this energy can be used for all sorts of things. And one of the things you can do with it is actually create matter. So there's no longer a conservation of energy.
Yeah,
It's
that
gone.
does sound
And
very
you can use
similar
it
to
to
so
control
to certain
things.
person.
Like you can use it to control things. You can basically put it into clothing, and like now control your clothing like by proxy with it. And you can do all sorts of stuff with it. But like, it's also you have to use a lot of it because well, everything like entropy is on steroids in there. So if you don't secure something with magic, it's not going to stay there for a long time. So like basically, there's a lot. Everything revolves around this magical energy in there. But as a result, technology is not that advanced. There's really not a lot of use for it. Technology is really just how can we harness some of this magic for some tame everyday stuff that we need. And really, other than that, it's just recording and communication equipment. Because if you can do that in an automatic way, you don't have to rely on someone strong enough, because that does cost a lot of energy. So let's do it automatically and then just not worry about it. It's really just that. And they rely a lot on these really powerful warriors to do that. And in fact, the idea with the like super strong monsters is that the only reason you can't just throw an adventure adept enough at it is that nobody can beat their energy drain. Nobody can drain energy close to fast enough to compete with them, even if they're well versed in how to actually drain energy properly. So that's what makes them dangerous. It's not that just it's big enough. It's that the monster truly drains energy so much better than any human ever could that you can't compete with it. That's what makes it dangerous. And that's why it's so far out there on the power scale and why technology will probably never really find a fix for them. What probably will find a fix for them is things to interfere with the draining, which I'm probably going to have to look into a lot more. But really, that's the only way to beat them. Just interfere with the draining enough to bring them down to your level, or at least to a level that you can fight.
Ain't that technology though?
Yeah. Technology.
Well, a lot of it is really not
technology. Technology is just well understood magic in our universe.
Yeah. True.
I mean, like the thing with it is that usually, like, it's really just like interfering with the draining is probably just a form of magic that we are aware of. And like I say, like my distinction between magic and technology there is technology is actual devices that we use in this, but magic is literally we use this energy directly. It's just very different forms of manipulating this energy, but we still manipulate it directly as humans. Like I control the energy directly, like it's another arm, or like I summoned this like temporary matter that is really just concentrated energy that imitates how matter works. And stuff like
or
this.
you can always just do what Warhammer40k really does and just magic? Technology? Isn't that all just psi energy?
Darker.
Yeah, darker. More darker.
Red makes it go
Red
faster.
goes faster.
Yeah.
Warhammer is such a fantastic example for like over the top but really good world building.
But
like, I mean, they had how much? Like 30, 40 years now with how many thousands of people writing stuff?
Isn't it like closer to 50 almost?
So the very first iteration of 40k was Rogue Trader, but I don't remember when it was released. Like early 80s, maybe?
It is like my first ever experience with Warhammer was somebody explaining to me on the bus to school a bit about like the
How
board
long
game.
did that bus drive to?
No, he was explaining to me a bit about the board game, And it was specifically talking about the orcs, and it was just like, the orcs are amazing. I'm like, why are the orcs so amazing? Well, everything about them is ridiculous. And then he goes to explain.
Yeah.
And the one thing I still remember is he said, like, basically, they can teleport, but they don't actually know that they can teleport. They think that they have to jump before it, and they literally call it the jump. So every time they teleport, they just jump, and then they teleport because they believe that it's a part of it. And he tells me that, I'm like, I like this. I like this a lot.
And like the beauty about Warhammer is also that that is not the explanation for everyone. That's just for the orcs. Because
The orcs are the
why
best.
not have different explanation? Why not? Why not?
Yeah.
I would
What
say
And
forbids you from having another
What's amazing is that
idea?
the orcs make sense out of this. It's just that the orcs are absolutely stupid, but they stumbled into, with their stupidity, they stumbled into the things that actually work. And that's the beauty of it.
I would say
Yeah,
if there's
it's-
one thing that characterizes Warhammer 40k for me, it's but wait, there's more.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I've been very much into like the lore. I've actually been telling myself I'll find the time this life to play the tabletop. That's a lie, honestly. But I'm really into. I do have a partially assembled 3D printed Warhound Titan. My first model.
Is that a good
Just-
unit?
It's not the Warhound title. It just Titan. It just looks somewhat similar because the Warhound is copyright and such. But yeah. Anyways, I'm really into the lore. I actually have read quite a few books. I really enjoy them, and there's so much. Holy shit.
Yeah, the problem with Warhammer 40k though is since it's been around, everything that's like sci-fi and grimdark, like almost always reminds you of it.
Yeah.
Well, because it's basically if Tolkien was still writing books today.
And on a few more drugs than he was. Yes.
Yeah, like they invented the if you look at what is it, StarCraft 2, for example, you will notice a similarity between the Space Marines, and that is not by chance. Like Warhammer has been quite the
Influence?
inspiration and the influence for a lot. But the thing is, Warhammer still exists. Like they still. And it's fascinating because they don't really ever give up an idea they've done 30 years ago. Just recently they started bringing the squats back, which is like their dwarfs, like just abhumans. Abhumans are human mutations that they tolerate. Like humanity really doesn't like mutations, but those are kind of okay. They're useful, cool. And squats are human dwarfs. They didn't write anything for them for the past 20 years, but just last year they have gotten actually new story and some tabletop models of them. Like they will, anything they write, eventually they will pick it up again.
Yeah, because it's a curated thing, but it's a curated thing where they use everything they have in there. They don't have a particular goal as much as they see what do we have and what can we do with it.
Yeah.
Which is a very different approach to almost any lore-based game or organization out there.
Also because of the insane time frame that Warhammer, like it's from 30,000 to 42,000 we're at now.
Yeah.
Like I've been reading the most up-to-date books. They're quite fascinating. I really, really enjoyed the book that is from the perspective of Reboot Gilliman. So this Primarch that's like returned and like done a 12,000 year time jump and now sees what catastrophe has turned the Imperium of Man into. And you just pick your time you want to read. Like there's a lot of pre-heresy story at 30k. There's a lot of like really fucking grim dark kind of gothic story in 35k and 40k. There are rogue traders. There are books about Xenos. It's one universe, but it's so freaking vast. It's insane.
I think I've seen somewhere between 10 to 20 hours of lore explanations on YouTube, and it still feels like I'm barely scratching the surface.
Yeah, like if you wanna have a very curated way of getting the lore, start with Litin, and then there are lots of other YouTubers that do really good Warhammer lore.
Yeah, it's big enough to truly feel like such a large universe. Like,
I mean,
yeah.
How many writers do they have? Like,
Enough.
it's not just writers. They license it out to so many external writers.
Yeah.
That's the beauty of it.
Okay.
They license
are
it out
curators.
because the universe is so big. They can basically allow everything as long as it fits into the general thematics.
Yeah, but
Yeah,
aren't there
like-
surely like some consistency issues between books then?
That's why it's curated. That's why they're
okay.
curated.
Yes and no. There's actually not that much retcon really, because you can always you could claim they cheated there a little. I wouldn't say they cheated, but they basically, because of the way the Imperium of Man, the main protagonist of the universe, is set up, is that knowledge will decay and you will forget things. So when somebody writes a story in around 35k and then they find an error in it, they can be just like, yeah, the scribe's fucked up. Like, this is a 5,000-year-old book we're reading this through. Because for whatever fucking reason, a modern civilization that does space travel needs to use parchment. Because
it's basically they have a good enough framework that allows a lot of room for error, because there's not one action-packed story that has to be tightly weaved. It's a giant universe that truly feels like a giant universe, and in many ways that is amazing, because you only have to uphold a few rules.
There is no such thing as the main story in Warhammer 40k.
Yeah,
I guess you could argue anything that revolves around the Emperor could be seen as such, but
I mean, if you really want to say, okay, this is the main story, then okay, you go with the current ruler of humanity, but that's only one perspective of thousands. If you really want to go with the main story, then Desolation of Baal and the Indomitus Crusade, those were the last two. I think there's a third one now. Those are like the main story in the sense that they progress the time. Like, those are the stories that actually move what year, what decade, what millennia we are in. So we are now in 42k. It's actually called by some now 42k when you're talking about the most modern iteration.
by the
Or
way,
41k. 41k.
quick question: was anyone surprised about the fall of Acadia?
No, but yes and no. It was
where
very
else
clear.
would they go to?
It was very clear that it would happen, but at the same time, they didn't have to do it now, but they wanted to move the plot. They could have just done like what Simpsons does and like do 30 years of the same year. But they actually moved the plot, like the Fall of Cadia, and it was extremely well curated because you have the books, you have the game, you have a lot. You have a lot of video games like Battlefield Gothic Armada 2 and 1 actually talk about the Fall of Cadia and add so much perspective and depth and lore to it. You're actually in space battling the, what was it, 13th Crusade? Or 14? Yeah, no, it would have to be 13th.
I think 13.
Battling Abaddon, and then you have the tabletop that like tells the story of the battle on the ground on Cadia, and then you have all these books telling the story. It's the way they license and curate it just lets them create such a wonderful dark universe.
I guess the question really is, where can you get a degree in Warhammer 40k history to actually write something that makes sense
I
within...
think they have something like that, actually.
Probably.
Yeah.
No, you don't
The
need
kind
you
of
don't need to know a
questions
lot.
what you really need to know as a writer.
You don't need to know a lot to write in it, but if you want to write something that is truly deep and not just a shallow look at a certain part of it, you're gonna do you're gonna have to do a lot of research. It's like SCP, I think, in many ways.
You better get going.
Is a similar thing, but SCP is just a non-profit. That's the difference.
So
SCP is...
So whoever is watching this, first of all, what are you doing watching this kind of podcast? And second of all...
I don't shame them!
Okay, fair enough. Keep watching. But second of all, if you want to write for Warhammer 40k, start researching now. If you're in your 20s, maybe you are done by your 50s or something like that.
Or just go to SCP, which is basically just a smaller, much more curated and non-profit one. Like, the one complaint a lot of people I have about Warhammer is that some of the stories in there really, from a purely, quality standpoint, they shouldn't have been written, but they're written simply because they bring in a lot of money. And on SCP, you don't have that. So, pick your flavor.
Yeah, but SCP is a pretty different kind of writing style. Very interesting in its own right, though.
It's more horror-focused, but really it doesn't
It's a little bit... I mean, yes and no. It just focuses on something entirely different. Warhammer has plenty of horror as well, but you don't... It's not... nobody reads a Warhammer book expecting it to be part of the horror genre.
Yeah.
But SCP is clearly... It's something different, but I can definitely see the reference, the commonalities.
SCP has a lot of non-horror stuff, though. That's a weird thing. SCP, well, even if you ignore the comedy articles, which, by the way, I think there's more of them than actual SCP articles.
There's some really good ones.
They're pretty goofy.
I think Dr. Bright is not allowed to do at the Foundation is probably one of my favorites. But, if you go to SCP, you have a lot of short stories, and this is something that I've been working on a lot lately. Short stories that look into very different aspects of SCP, and a lot of them that also look into, just how this world feels, not from a everything is terrible perspective, but from an actual in-place perspective. Actual stories of the lives of agents and stuff like this. And I can't say it's not good. There's some really good stuff, though. And with SCP, you have the added benefit of, there's no one canon. So really, anything fits.
I mean...
It has to be of a certain quality, but really there's no canon to SCP.
You can see that as a benefit. To me personally, that's kind of a drawback, because it's kind of hard for me to get into something specific, because, in the end, it's not really canon, or... I don't know. That's just me personally, though.
Yeah, but it also means that you can build your own canon of what do you believe to be in the SCP.
Yes, true. I mean, yeah, it
and
has
also
its
you can reference stuff for yourself, which is nice.
Yeah, for example, some of the SCPs just, I don't think, make a whole lot of sense.
Yeah, but some of them, 3000, I think, is probably one of the better ones. 3000 is amazing. And 5000 is also really good. The Ouroboros cycle, one of the 001 propositions, is a masterpiece in my eyes. And you get some weird stuff.
Wait, was it 001 that?
Ouroboros
is 00?
No, Ouroboros is one of the 001 propositions, which basically I think there's around 24 of them. The idea being that, in lore, it's just the SCP Foundation hiding the true identity of 001. But out of lore, it's just no one writer should have this place, and it's too hard to choose which of these stories will be anyways, because they have such different directions, where do you even start to compare? And as a result, there's a lot of propositions for 001 because it's so significant. And some of them are really good. And some of them even reference each other, which is really funny.
Fucking finally. Sorry, you go on. I'll let you know what I mean.
Yeah, so Ouroboros cycle is one of my favorite ones because it goes instead of being an SCP per se, it's like the
Remind me
actual
real quick what 001 was.
Again,
Unknown.
it's like there's no 1001. There's a lot of propositions to it.
Oh,
In law, it's because the Foundation hides it. Out of law, it's because you can't really pick one.
I watched a couple, like I watched Warhammer 40k lore. I've also started watching different, like the Vulture is one YouTuber I watch that like just reads the SCP stories in a thematic way, and he was reading the story about 001 that was an artificial intelligence that was so good at destroying SCP that at one point it was the only SCP left.
Yeah, and then it deactivated itself. It's an amazing story.
Yeah, but it's like multiverse, so who cares? You can have multiple 001.
Yeah. With Ouroboros Cycle, what I like about it is that the actual SCP in Ouroboros Cycle, like the actual proposition for what is 001, is basically like it's in the end there, and it's the Foundation itself. But the entire story before that is about the power struggle of people continuously thinking that the SCP Foundation is evil because they don't know everything that it does, and they think that it is evil. They're from the Chaos Insurgency, and they think we can do better. So they hunt down the 05 until eventually no 05 is left, and the person doing it, who is now the sole survivor of this expedition, ends up meeting the actual spirit of the Foundation and coming to face with the fact, like coming to terms with the fact, like coming face to face with it, that at the end of the day, somebody has to be there to answer the phone. That is literally the quote from that. Are you going to be there? And then he ends up creating his own 05 to continue the Foundation's work because he realizes that there has to be an 05. There has to be the Foundation. It is an inevitable evil. And then, as it ends, one of his friends that was with him throughout the whole thing, that didn't see this, has now become the new rebel challenging the 05, who wants to wipe them out.
Quick question.
So
Should I
the
stop
cycle
the recording here, or...?
Yeah, actually, we should probably also edit out all the spoilers we had about the different...
I may cut this
we
off.
are now in tangent tone.
Yeah, I'll probably cut this out into like a spoiler warned tangent section or something like that.
Yeah.
So, whoever has been watching, I don't know how like the cut's gonna be for this. So yeah, bye.